Oh yes, this is the Hardcore Marketing Show. I'm Casey Cheshire, your host for this epic journey. Today's show is sponsored by Ringmaster, on a mission to launch B2B podcasts that create relationships, generate revenue, and drive growth. Ringmasterlive.com. Bam. All right, there we go. So I hit the button, the recording begins, and man, am I excited today. The guest is a marketing executive and thought leader, podcasting community leader. We're going to be talking a lot about podcasts today, which is one of my favorite topics. And she has specialties beyond that, also PR, social media, and community outreach, which just makes total sense. She is like a centerpiece at the podcasting community, as you will learn. And she's also big into what I'd like to call passion-infused marketing, really helping creators and founders who are passionate about helping people get their message out. Longtime podcast fan, currently in Spain, I will say, creator of the Podcast Brunches Club chapter in Valencia, director of communications at Podbean. Shannon Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here today from sunny Spain.
Yeah, man, you are doing a lot of things, and you're across the seas right now. So we're talking somehow across the Atlantic Ocean. How does this even work?
Fabulous internet.
I know, right? Amazing. Sometimes this is a better connection than with some people I have in the next state over. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on this one. And you know what? Enough about me. The fact that you work at Podbean, the fact that you are a thought leader, community leader, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to pass you something. It's kind of heavy for me, but I know you work out. So here it is. Ugh. Okay, here we go. Grab that. That's Thor's hammer. Go ahead. Reach out.
Got it.
You got it? Okay, there you go. All right. So take Thor's hammer and smash for me some kind of marketing myth, bogus strategy, misconception. Set the record straight once and for all.
This is going to be maybe a surprising one because it's kind of a new myth. It's not a myth that's been around a long time. It's just formulating in a lot of people's speech lately, which is that podcasting is oversaturated and it's just too late to get into it. For my business, it just, it's already been done. It's not going to do any good because there's too many podcasts out there. And I'm just hearing that.
You missed the trend.
Yeah. And this is one of those things where, it goes from one extreme to the other in marketing, right? It's a shiny new thing. Everybody's excited. People want to just do it because they can do it. And then all of a sudden it transitions to it's no good anymore. And that's kind of what's happened, what I'm hearing little bits of now with podcasting.
Yeah. It's like, you missed the boat on TikTok and it's too late. You can't get on it. Podcasts, everyone has them, right? There's millions of podcasts now. So why even start?
Yeah. And the funny thing is there are only around 2 million podcasts.
Oh, is it 2 million?
Right now. Yeah. And it's a little bit of a weird number to quantify because there's not just one place, you find them, but that is up a lot, but you still have to compare that to 600 million blogs. That's 2 million versus 600 million. And, most people understand that a website and blogging, is they don't say, oh, it's oversaturated, we're not going to do it. So I think, right off the bat, just the numbers prove that this myth is really false.
Yeah. No, now let's dive into this. Where does this myth come from? Why do we think this? I mean, you just mentioned 600 million blogs.
Yeah, I think it's a common thing that happens in marketing. As we said, something is we have this syndrome of shiny new thing where it's kind of hop on board, get on the latest thing, and it kind of because of that, then as something starts to get popular, it's like, oh, that's not the shiny new thing anymore. And as we've seen, email marketing, good example. I've had so many conversations over the years. Oh, it's dying out. Oh, this and that. And you just see, good marketing principles and following some things that we'll talk about what you do with how you use a podcast. It means that you can tap into the power of it or other medium, and even I just saw a study recently about the top 100 business podcasts, and quite a huge percentage of them were newer shows. So it just shows that here they are. They're some of the top podcasts out there, and a lot of them are very new. So I think because more and more people and businesses are creating podcasts, people do, there is a there is a truth behind the myth in the fact that there are a lot more podcasts. There were only around 500,000 in 2018, so it's a big increase. But oversaturated, I think, is where it kind of, the myth goes, overboard for sure. And the thing is, a colleague of mine always says, it's not that you're fighting for a piece of the pie, and that there's more people fighting for that pie, is that the pie is bigger because the amount of listeners the people listening to podcasts and listening more regularly and all of that has also increased more significantly. So there's still plenty of room.
What a great point about the pie getting bigger. Because I was gonna, throw some positive vibes toward Podbean. I mean, one of if my favorite platform for hosting a podcast, everyone that listens to this particular podcast is hosted on this one. And now I'm not a shill for Podbean, but like, I do love the platform and all the podcasts we create are on there. So it was just so exciting to talk to you. But I was going to say, what do you got? Like 95% of all those 2 million are on Podbean. Yeah. Something like that.
We do have a large number of podcasts, and we have a lot of podcasts too that host with us, but they use them for really specific purposes. So they're not always out there on all the platforms.
Oh, really?
For example, like churches, membership organizations, different things like that. And we also do internal podcasting. So you won't see those, you won't find them on Apple Podcasts. They are just being distributed internally to employees or members. So, but yeah, we've seen tremendous growth in what's hosted with us and the space in general. But we have a listening app also. So we see that pie getting bigger because we see that app growing, and that means more people are listening and more people are on it more actively every day. So there's definitely, if anyone who's a podcast fan probably knows, when you get hooked on it, you start to look usually for other podcasts. So that kind of expands it for everybody out there.
Yeah, I've known about the app for a while, but I just assumed everyone was on Spotify or iTunes. But I literally bumped into someone the other day who said that they were listening on the Podbean app, and I was like, all right, because I think I get more stats if they do it that way, but also just cool. It's great to see the platform grow, and you're right, the pie keeps getting bigger. Like, who knows how many, we chat again in a year and you're like, okay, we're at like 8 million. Like, what just happened? The number just went crazy. So it's growing rapidly. It's now is the time, that sounds like.
Yes, I definitely think so. It's definitely not too late. That myth we can smash. But I do think it, just like other things in marketing, that doesn't mean just run out and do it without thinking about the why and some of these other important points, because it won't work for you if you don't think about your goals and if you don't produce something of decent quality that people want to listen to, because there's enough out there now that people can move on to something else.
This is a perfect transition, right? What a great point. Okay. We got everyone all hyped. Okay. I'm at the cutting edge. Right. And I think for me, this kind of reminds me of when I was at a company. I was a young lad, young marketer. And my boss said, there's this thing called Twitter. I need you to register for it. I'm like, what's that? And I was something like user, I'm in like the 1900, no, 1.9 million or maybe 19 million. But now there's like, 400, 500, there's like hundreds of millions. And I was like 19, which to me seemed like a high number. But then when you see it in the mix of the rest of it, it's very early. So we're all jazzed. We're like, this is the same kind of moment where if you want to get early on Twitter, that was then. This is like early. You're still early right now, but not so early. You can just throw some garbage together, and then, Podbean is amazing, but it can't fix that up for you. You got to put some thought into it. So my thought is then, or my question is then, what kind of guidance do you have for folks that they're like, okay, I'm in. I heard it from the source. I want to do this, but I also don't want to just wing it. What should they do?
Well, I think a couple things to start with. One, what's going to make your podcast stand out? And really, actually, before that, the first thing is starting with a goal. And so, especially if we're talking about for a business, for your business, there are so many different purposes a podcast can have that
So true.
people may not even think of. Commonly people think, oh, what I want to do with a podcast is grow it, get a huge audience, be one of the top, 10 in Apple Podcasts, get immediately, recognized within that directory, get lots of fans. And especially when it's a podcast and people are starting it around a passion, they think, oh, and eventually if I could get ads and make money. I think for businesses, a lot of times that's not the end goal, and probably shouldn't be, because they can make a lot more money off of it a different way, maybe. So, but really thinking about that, what's the goal that you're trying to achieve, and how does podcasting fit, and does it? I mean, in some cases, maybe, there are other mediums that would be better. You also definitely have to think about your capacity to do it. So if you're struggling with juggling 18 balls in a business, and you have major priorities, if you can't maybe outsource some of this or fit it into that business schedule, it may not be the time. But yeah, what's the why behind it? And I was just talking to someone about this earlier, that this person said to me, and this multiple people I've heard this from, and I think you had a previous interview on your show where this was one of the things mentioned, that a lot of times for a business, just the people if you're doing an interview show, just the people you interview and connect with, that might end up being, that might be your goal, or at least one of them. And it might be one of the best results that you get. You can get people on your podcast, big names, big people in your industry, thought leaders, and that's a connection and a relationship you're building that might lead to business. It might lead to opportunities, so that, people don't think of that, but that can often be the goal. And then obviously being, out there as a thought leader, bringing in leads, all of these kind of things, having great, content that's out there, having content that can help cut down on the sales cycle, keep you in front of an audience, a lot of the normal kind of marketing reasons. But sometimes, people, again, they kind of think of podcasts in a very generic way, and there's podcasts out there succeeding in lots of different ways.
Yeah, like that purpose drives it, right? That why can make it unique in its own right. So yeah, there's 2 million, but if you have a well thought out reason why you want to do it, or scope or something, some kind of goal in mind, that just makes you so much better than just meandering along and just trying to hang out. I love that you highlighted the guest, and I was gonna joke that, like, yeah, even like the head of marketing at Podbean, come on, hello, nice to meet you. But yeah, the guest, for me, I think podcasting, the guest is the magic, right? And then the audience, if we could all get in a room and hang out, I would totally do that. So maybe we'll try that. But the immediate is just being able to connect with another person and learn from them and learn their story. It's just like, oh, it's so cool. And it's the kind of communication you don't really have that often. Normally we'd be checking your phones if we're out at dinner or something, business lunch. Oh, yeah, I'll be right back, I gotta take this, but no, you can't, because you're on a podcast. So you gotta be focused on each other.
Yeah, definitely. It's dedicated time together. And people have tremendous results from that. You meet that person. I've been on some recently where we, maybe we're going to do business together, but also people have said to me, oh, after our conversation, I thought I need to connect you with so-and-so. And just so many different things came out of it in the end that weren't about necessarily me getting a customer from it directly, but will really have a long-term impact on our business.
Yeah.
So there's so many, and those, the why is important, because when you think about what you're trying to achieve, it does help you figure out how you're going to distinguish yourself from what's out there. And then also determine things about the show. Like, obviously what we're talking about, if you're going to do that, then obviously you need to do an interview show, because if you do a solo show, you're not going to be meeting other guests. So, but if you're wanting to, if there's a specific educational purpose you have, where your clients are struggling with some issues and you really, you'd love leads to hear about it, but you really even just want your clients to have better education and information in a really convenient way, that you don't have to send them, lengthy emails and to read through a blog post. You just want to be in their ears. Then that could be a different kind of show. So it really can also help you determine how to format and structure things, and that kind of piece as well.
That's a great point, that the goal helps inform the structure. Yeah, so that way there's some order to the chaos. if that's your goal. Otherwise, enjoy the chaos, stay frosty. Have you seen any goals like this that aren't good? Are there any goals, if you set this as your goal, like, I don't know, or is it kind of just open for everything?
I think, especially depending on what your area of expertise is or your topic, the goal of being the billions of downloads podcast, the goal of being top 10 is not going to be realistic for a lot of things. Those podcasts tend to be certain types, and they're not usually business podcasts. They may be business inspirational podcasts, but if you're any kind of niche area, and and again, that goal, I would also say the problem with that goal is not just that it may be unrealistic, but also that, is that really the goal that you want for your business?
Right.
What's that going to do for you? And probably having that many listeners associated with your name and your business, of course, it's likely to have positive effects, but is it the most important thing? I don't think so in most cases. And with that, it goes hand in hand with what I mentioned earlier about thinking, I want to have a podcast, I want to get popular, I want to sell ads on it and make money. That can fit in some cases. And but let's say I have a small business and I really want to grow my thought leadership, I want to grow my client base, I want to have more of an ongoing funnel, and I see it as that kind of thing, then selling ads is not the way I'm going. I'm trying to actually, if I'm going to run ads, quote unquote, they're probably going to be for my own stuff.
Right.
And to tell people what I'm doing, and to do a call to action that hopefully draws them in as leads. So getting outside advertisers isn't going to be the way that I'm going to go for that. And honestly, when we talk about monetization of podcasts, we tell podcasters about all the different ways that they can make money. And one of the things that nowadays I hear it a lot in the conversation, but early on I didn't as much, is sometimes it's indirect monetization. Your podcast actually might be a cost to your business. It's a marketing cost. It can be a fairly low cost, which is nice. But then if you drove a ton of business in, you made money off of your podcast, but people didn't. I used to notice that people didn't consider that piece of it. They didn't think that was a way to go about it. And over time, as things have gotten more sophisticated, you do see people. I mean, they're selling courses, they're bringing in coaching clients. They realize now, that really is a great way to actually monetize.
That makes total sense. And I'm more of like a B2B guy, and I see it so, even though it seems like such a consumer thing, I see so much more potential in the B2B world. One, because I'm biased, but two, because one great conversation with your ideal customer, and let's say you're doing a weekly show and you have 52 interviews, one of those might pay for the thing for 2 years. One of those big business to business deals might just really, so I mean, that indirect revenue like you're talking about can be, it's also kind of trackable too. You're like, 52 people, this one bought, hey, we don't have to fiddle with Google Analytics and all these other things. It's like so direct. You can really see that. And I wanted to go back to when I asked you about the goal. I think this is what I like about you. So many times, especially people that work at like a software company, there's less strategy. It's more just, hey, however you want to use this thing, just sign up, please, just come sign up. But you didn't do that. You said, look, these are all great goals. You need one, but be careful around the idea of being famous. And that would be my answer too. That's what I've always warned people about, because then you are competing for just the views, and it just shifts the whole thing. And I've tried helping someone do that, and I've helped so many people launch podcasts, but the one person, he literally told me that was his goal, is I just want to be more famous. And it just the model, now you're just trying to you're in like a different realm. And you're right, the monetization, and I know, shout out Podbean has some great ad marketplaces, and also, and I think that's just at the very cusp of it. I think there'll be a lot of things being added in there, but we've experimented with that. And I think Tim Ferriss even said, don't even think about that until you have something like 1 million downloads an episode or something. And I don't know if you need to wait for 1 million, but I think his advice was sage, and that it was like, don't get distracted by, these short-term things. Think about all the things that are happening.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's especially in that B2B marketplace, there's better things, that you can typically achieve with a podcast. It is very much um, whatever kind of show you're doing, it is building relationships, because if you're doing
Yeah,
interviews, clearly that's one aspect. And it's not just the moment you sit down together and have the conversation that's recorded. It's maybe you and I, talked before, we recorded
sure.
this time, we have emails back and forth. So there's a lot of touch points and opportunities with those guests. But then it's also a relationship with the listener. And there's a lot of advice out there that talks about talking to, a listener. People feel that it's sort of a one-on-one conversation, even though it's kind of a one-way conversation.
Yeah.
But us podcast listeners feel like we have a relationship with our favorite podcasters a lot of times, because there's something about hearing someone in your earbuds, especially, I take you on my walk,
Yeah.
I associate that, and it has a different sort of magic, so you build those kinds of relationships. So you will find often that, the listeners, oh, I remember every time you mentioned this, or, as if it's a very personal
Yeah.
thing. So you have that opportunity to build that in a way that's sometimes hard in other mediums. That voice, just hearing that voice is,
Hearing that voice in your head on a, like you said, on a walk, on a run, on a commute, and you get kind of used to it. I've got a couple go-tos that I just, I listen to that one first and I listen to that one second, and I just, the voices, I know them, and it almost feels like you just came home, or you came back to your favorite office place and you just know the voices around you. It's a great feeling, and really cool point about the relationship with the listener. Even though you're not out there, I can't tell you how neat it is to get like a LinkedIn message from people. It doesn't happen very often. I'm not in the famous category, but like when it does, and they're usually pretty excited, but I'm even more excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody's listening. And I know people are, but it's really neat to connect it with the actual person listening. So thank you to everyone listening, but also to those
thank
that
you.
send messages and whatnot. I really appreciate it. Shannon, any other kind of tips? I love the idea of the goal. We talked about informing the design a little bit. Any other tips for our new podcasting friends?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think we kind of talked about do it well if you're going to do it. So think about the bandwidth you have and what areas the most important thing I think to focus on is what is the content going to be, the quality content. You can do some things to make sure your audio quality is decent, so it's not harmful to people's ears. But if it's boring content or something that there are millions of others already doing, doesn't have a unique spin, doesn't kind of weave a story, then that's going to really, keep people from listening. And I think as the other part of that would be to take a look at what's happening and see where you can improve. Almost everybody will say that when they started out, they cringe sometimes at their early podcast, or they learned a lot of lessons, and that's perfectly fine. It's great. It's another reason why a lot of times you may want to get ahead so that you don't have to be panicked about getting episodes out. But I wouldn't necessarily advise that you record 100 episodes before launch and put them all up, because you may get feedback. You may want to get feedback from people that oh, we loved what you said about this, but you really could you go deeper into that? Maybe you re-interview that person, and it's easy to modify things with a podcast. So that's really important. And then with the goals, I think the other thing with the goals is there are a lot of little myths and little sort of tricks to succeed that people will say to get popular. And first of all, you can get easily distracted. And secondly, sometimes they're not even very accurate.
You want to like kind of rapid fire throw them out at us? What are these things we should watch out for and void?
Well, for example, with getting really popular, people really worry about getting into the Apple features, getting into new and noteworthy. You'll hear we could probably Google right now podcasts about how to get into new and noteworthy.
Podcast about podcasting, how
About
to get into
podcasts, about how to get
podcasting.
into,
Oh my
new and
goodness.
noteworthy. I'm actually going to be covering this on our Podbean podcast,
Oh,
which is coming
nice.
up soon, because
What's it called? How do we find it?
it's Podcasting Smarter.
Oh, I love that.
So we're going to be covering this kind of not just about Apple's different features and new and noteworthy, but kind of some of the myths around some of that. And then also, what are the things you can do, to get recognized and to make your podcast searchable and easy to find and all that. But there's a lot of things people will say, oh, you need to have 10 episodes to launch. You have 8 weeks to get in it. There's just a lot of that kind of stuff. You also hear all the time about, rate and review so that people can find me. And of course, ratings and reviews and any kind of social proof are just that. I mean, they're great social proof, and it certainly can help, but a lot of that is incorrect in terms of actually how it results in for some of those charts. So that kind of stuff, I would say, and whether it's accurate or not, it's more the fact that it's going to, if you're focusing on that, maybe you're focusing in the wrong place, especially for a business podcast.
God, I love that. You're right. It's a distraction. Totally. Okay, ratings, reviews, generally speaking, that's great. But, if you're trying to hack the system, you're thinking about the wrong thing. You're focused in the wrong area. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's some very similar. I know you've had a lot of shows about things like SEO and
totally.
it's the same types of things where people are like, how can I game the system? And Google really just wants to be a good search engine and produce results people want. And so they're trying to, not allow those kind of things. They're trying, and all the podcast directories and apps are also trying to surface good content for people, and they're trying to figure out what's popular. And so any ways of gaming the system usually don't work, or maybe are a myth up front, but if they are working, it's probably going to change.
Love
and
that.
You're not going to keep people if they find your podcast and it's not good, or it's not what they wanted. You might see some increase, but then in the long run, does that have anything to do with your business goals?
Yeah, you trying to get someone for the one listen, or you trying to get the weekly listen?
Exactly.
Or maybe just making a relationship with a new person who wants to listen to it. That all ties back into goals and priority. If you are chasing that fame and fortune, you're going to be susceptible to trying all these hacks out, thinking that that's going to be the place to get you there. I mean, Mr. Beast on Yahoo, he just wanted to help people out and have some fun doing it. It wasn't like, ooh, let me become a super famous person and have 65 million downloads on something ridiculously silly. There's a why behind it. Absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
Man, well, this is so. I feel like we probably should schedule like a 5-hour download of your brain on these topics because so much in here. And some we'll just have to have you come back, and I could see a whole episode on some of these topics. But I'm curious now, like, who are you? Who are you? Take me back to like little Shannon. Did you know you're going to be working in Spain and on a podcast and, thought leadership and all this stuff? What was it like growing up? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Maryland, the Maryland, Virginia area, and all kind of up and down the East Coast in my younger years. And I have always been a really curious person, and I've always been in some way a communicator. I'm one of the many people in this world of marketing who got in trouble for talking too much in school.
Nice.
So I kind of knew, and I'm a huge reader, and so reading was kind of my first thing before there were podcasts. And then pretty much very, very early days of podcasts, I discovered them and got really into this form as a way to learn things and be entertained and hear about all kinds of different topics. So it's not too surprising, but there weren't podcasts when I was a kid, so I definitely didn't know I was going to be in podcasting.
God, at some point we didn't even have internet, so it's like I'll take anything. But you're right, that bandwidth has gotten better. I remember once trying to rip a song off of a CD pre MP3, and it's taking, my computer had, I don't know what, all of 4 megabytes, and the computer wanted all of that space just to have one song stored. And it's like, MP3s came around, was such a huge deal. We could now store a bunch of them, and iPods and all that, of course, but just the compression, the technology keeps getting better, and bandwidth, we're not freaking out over bandwidth as much anymore. And so we can actually listen to these things in our cars. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's come a long way. I mean, my original podcast days were the iPod,
Yeah.
downloading onto the iPod and all of that. So it was funny, but I found it fantastic as soon as, even though it wasn't as convenient then, it was fantastic to me because I loved the on-demand nature of it, because I would listen as I was driving around doing marketing stuff. I would listen to stuff on the radio, but it was like, oh, there's nothing on at this when I'm at this time. I'm hitting commercials and everything. So podcasts were a revelation.
Yeah, there is nothing on. There's still 2022. There's still nothing on. What takes this? It's interesting that you were talking and reading, because sometimes people are just like all into on the reading or the talking, but both. I think that's really special. But what took you from, growing up in Maryland doing that to saying I want to go do psych and sociology?
Oh, I don't know. Just, I guess, a general curiosity about
Curiosity.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, people, places, cultures. I mean, I can think of a lot of things I could have studied, but I think that's definitely a big part of it. And I've always had a wanderlust, which when I was younger, it was fulfilled through books. I was always nose in a book and kind of, off in my imagination, and still am a lot. But that eventually translated to travel. As soon as I could, kind of, I was ready to do that. But I think I don't know. I guess that all comes from the same place. I sometimes
Hmm.
think, did books drive me to want to travel and make me curious, or was it a wanderlust that made me use books to kind of access new worlds and then also travel? Did it come? So I think it kind of came from that same innate thing.
When did that start? Like, do you remember your very first trip out of the country or overseas or?
My first trip out, I remember a lot of domestic trips. My first out of the country would be in high school.
Hmm.
I did two trips to Europe. So we had a mini, like, exchange student through a city kind of program. So not a full year thing, but like
Right.
2 weeks, I think. She came over from France, and then I went there. And then I also did a school trip to the UK. And so, yeah, my parents helped me go to Europe long, long before they ever went. And so I'm
Wow.
very appreciative that, I did have help with that. So that was great. So they didn't know what they were getting themselves into, fueling my wanderlust,
They got you
that I would then
addicted.
move overseas and
Yeah.
not come back.
So you're in high school and you spent what, 2 months in France?
It was, no, about two or 3 weeks, I
Two,
think it
three
was.
weeks.
And then
Okay.
the other trip was something like 2 weeks also for
Okay.
a school trip, a theater related thing.
I guess that
So
makes sense. If it was 2 months, you might not have come back, right? You might
no,
have just
probably probably
stayed.
wouldn't have.
I'm staying here. Where in France? Do you remember when was it just like in suburb of Paris or?
It was a suburb of Paris. Yeah, we had there was a sister city program. So the city that I lived in, or that it was also a suburb of Washington, D.C., they had this sister city. And so they basically had maybe 50, I think, perhaps, students from high school come over, stay with host families. So she came over to the US first, and then basically the next year I went there. And yeah, and it was
Wow.
funny too, because the student from France that came to our home, she was very homesick a lot of the time. She enjoyed the time, but she was definitely homesick. And then I went, and they kept asking me, do you want to call home? And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm fine.
Your
I mean,
parents
I
like,
love my
where is
family,
she?
but I just wasn't, I was into the adventure.
Into the adventure. What part of Paris? What town or city was it?
I can't remember the name of the town now. I'm so old, it's been so long, but it was a suburb. So it was probably, I think, if you went by train, it was maybe like 40 minutes. So it
Okay.
was pretty
Like
small
north,
town.
south, east, west.
I don't remember. No, I
Wow.
don't remember.
Might
But it
want to
was pretty
dig into those
interesting
records.
because
I might be interested to find out, just where you got to start. But I just recently went to Paris pre-COVID, and my expectations were like, oh, the people are mean and rude and they hate Americans. It's like none of that. None of that. We like wine, we like food, we like culture and enjoying life.
Mhm.
Join this if you want. And I was like, I'm in. Let's go. you don't you don't have to twist my arm on that, and yeah, I don't need you to rush the tab on the restaurant or anything. I'm in. So what a great place to start your at least your overseas travels in Paris. How'd you get to China? You spent some time in Shanghai, you said?
Yeah. So I mean, how can I narrow down my story? So basically, this
Right.
wanderlust I've had it kind of forever. But my husband and I, at one point, kind of were looking around, going, okay, we want to do something different. We haven't traveled as much overseas, especially as we'd like. We traveled a lot in the U.S., but we haven't traveled as much overseas, and so we ended up doing this thing where we took a leave of absence. He took a leave of absence from his job, and I
Okay.
actually changed to remote working and sort of modified my job a bit. I went to my boss saying, I'm planning to do this adventure, and she said, are you telling me you're quitting? And I said, I don't know, but can we work something out? So I started remote working a long time ago,
Wow.
before it was
Before it was
super
cool.
common. Yeah, before it was cool and common. And so I started doing that, and we were here in Spain for a period, really enjoyed it. And then in the midst of a whole bunch of stuff, my husband actually got his company actually transferred him to China, or gave him an opportunity, I should say, to go, and he had always wanted to do an overseas assignment. So it kind of, it was kind of an interesting opportunity, and something we thought maybe we'd do 2 years, and we ended up there 8 years in Shanghai.
Man.
So you never know where life is going to lead. And then we always really loved the time we had spent here in Spain. So we always had this as a goal to come back. So
Come
finally
back to
got
Spain.
to.
How did your Chinese, how did it go? You're pretty
My
fluent or?
Oh no, I'm really making a significant effort with Spanish right now, because I am embarrassed by my futile, or almost lack thereof, yeah,
What
Chinese
did you take
effort.
in school?
Spanish.
Took
So I
Spanish?
do
Yeah,
have,
me too.
yeah, so I have and it's definitely a lot easier. You have some background in it, and familiarity, and obviously the characters in Chinese can be can be quite challenging. But I'm not
Yeah.
a natural language learner, so it's still a struggle with Spanish, but it's going to be better than my Chinese. Well, it already is better than my Chinese ever was.
I'm sure. It's a really hard language to learn. You're right, because you have to transliterate first or understand what the symbols mean, then understand what that word means. And it's like two steps versus, at least you can read Spanish. You don't necessarily know what it means, maybe you can figure it out, or that eighth grade lesson kind of like comes back to haunt you, and you remember Senora Andrada, and what she was trying to bang into your head at the time. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You
Did
absorb
you
it by being around it more than
right.
you would. So.
Right. Did you meet any folks from Podbean in China, or those like separated by several years?
No, yeah, I worked with some team members there. We're all over the world. So yeah, I did work with them there. And yeah, we actually have a team that's pretty international. We kind of span all the way from, I think we have a team member in Bali right now, all the way to Midwest US, and sometimes even Pacific time zone. So we almost cover the whole the whole gamut of time zones, which is great, because our customers are all over the world too.
Totally
So
great.
it, well,
A little hard for all hands meeting though. Someone's
yeah,
getting up at 1 a.m.
yeah, challenging. Yeah, I
uh,
used to, when I first moved overseas, I used to do a weekly meeting with my team in Florida in the US, a team that I did marketing for there. And I remember the calls were 3 a.m.
oh jeez.
That's the worst possible time.
That is the worst possible time. Man. Well, crazy. Well, a bit of a hypothetical question for you now, because I may or may not have a time machine here in New Hampshire. So let's say you come visit, you're doing the travel thing, and you get over to New England again, and we get some beers and lobster, and you get to use the time machine, most importantly. But it's a particular kind. It goes back in time, and you get to meet yourself just after that undergrad, just after that degree at Wake Forest, and you get to meet that version of you. So that Shannon, you can talk to yourself. It doesn't mess up the space-time continuum. You'll be good, right? So what would you say to her? What would you give her advice, recommendations? What would you tell yourself?
Wow, yeah, I wouldn't change a lot, because I think it's really hard to know what in your life affects anything. But I would say relax. I don't know that myself would take that advice,
Right.
but I would say it anyway. And I would also say, uh, be open. People are good. People all have problems. People that I just every year, every day, I feel like I learn this more and more that people have things a lot of times that they're hiding, that they're ashamed of, that they are, that they don't share with people. And then, you start to talk to people and they tell you their stories and you realize, oh my goodness, there's so many other people that are going through the same thing or the same challenge and stuff. So I would definitely tell myself, just be more open, share yourself with people, ask people questions so they feel they can open up and share more. So yeah, on a personal level. Professionally, my career has been so, yeah, maybe unusual, but enjoyable. So I don't know that I would tell myself to do anything different necessarily.
Yeah, yeah, but be open and share. It's amazing how we forget sometimes, especially in marketing, we forget that those ones and zeros behind any analytics we're looking at are real people with just as much complexity as ourselves, with unless we're in some sort of weird metaverse and Zuckerberg is controlling us. If that's not the case, then everyone on that dashboard is a real person, and they have hopes and dreams, and like you said, they have things that they're worried about or scared about or angry about, and there's just this thing, and just understanding that people, we're not alone, and just understanding that one person may have had the same problem. That just got me thinking, all the way back around to even podcasts, right?
Yeah.
The more of them there are, the more people sharing just the most obscure things. Someone has a skin illness and they want to make a podcast about it, help other people out. Cool. Cool. You're going to have so many people thanking you later for that one thing, just because you were open and honest and you were brave to share what you're worried about.
Absolutely. I think that really is the power of podcasting. There's so many types of podcasts and things, but people sharing stories, and there are so many little, niche podcasts. And I think the sometimes the barrier to sharing the story, I mean, it's still scary, to talk on a mic and share things that might be personal and put yourself out there. But a lot of people aren't going to write a blog or a website about that thing. But sometimes it's easier to talk and do a conversational style. So I think it's opened up a world for a lot of those kind of things to be out there. And I'm amazed every day at the different podcasts I come across, and whether it's a serious topic and something like what you mentioned, or just like a very niche hobby that
Yeah.
people then get to connect with others and realize, oh, there's other people that are into underwater dog sweater knitting or something.
Right. Like you name it. Yeah. And it's not as obscure anymore. And people can find a community that way, and at least find someone else who you don't. And I think the thing, you don't have to know everything to host a podcast about a particular topic. You just need to like that topic. Like I think at some point I'm going to make another show about space and rockets and stuff. I am not a rocket scientist. I am not qualified to build a rocket, but man, does that subject just, light me up and get me talking about Elon building a starship, and I won't shut up, right? But like, that's a perfect recipe. So for those listening, when it comes time to start your own, you don't need to. Boy, I don't know everything about marketing, but man, after interviewing 200 and 70 plus people, you know a couple things, so you don't have to know everything at the start for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits. And you learn a lot in doing the podcast, and you grow along with your guests. So that can be, a huge benefit of doing one. But definitely no one really wants to hear someone come on and just spew out all their knowledge. So
I know.
I think, even those that are really thought leadership podcasts and are sharing information, they're often learning as they go and talking to others, and kind of exploring topics is kind of what people love hearing. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's a fun medium to do a lot of different things with.
Isn't it kind of like art too? Because really, you can just create anything, and you can make it super edited or not, or, make it a dialogue or not, or weirdness or fun or seriousness, I don't know. But just, you can just do whatever you want. There's no rules
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I mean, because there isn't a gatekeeper, I mean, obviously if you wanted to have a show on the radio, you have to pitch it and they have to want that kind of style. And they're probably going to say, well, no, your style has to fit in this format, this amount of time. We have a
Right.
time slot. With a podcast, there are 5-hour podcasts. There are 5-minute, there are 1-minute podcasts. There's every kind of style. And though you do have to think about what makes sense for the topic and what you want to do, you can get as interesting with it as, and that may be some of what distinguishes you. You may be the quick, short snippet that people listen to every day on marketing or something, where someone else does the interview show where they go more in depth. And you may cover a niche topic, but there's scripted shows. Audio dramas are a whole world in themselves that are quite fascinating. And so there's just every kind of specialty out there. So
You
can
made
make
me
it
want to
work
do
for
an audio drama just now. I was like, you know what?
space audio drama. That could be cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow, interesting. With some ambient space noise behind.
Yeah, you got to do sound effects, and yeah, there are
Right.
people I know that work on those kind of shows. And there are some indie creators I know that it's just really impressive, because that's a hefty workload a lot of times to, script things, and sometimes, coordinate voice actors and do those sound effects and different things. So it's really fascinating to me, but it's something I admire, but not my
100%.
skill.
100%. But I've got a great producer. So if I could literally call upon lightning from the sky and it would happen right about now. So yeah, I really want to know this, because you're surrounded by podcasts. Where does this go? Have you thought about the future, the evolution? Podbean is leading the way. So like what's around the corner for podcasting? What does it mean when you go to 2 million, to 4 million, to 8 to 600 million podcasts, other than a very happy Podbean family? But like, what does that mean for all of us?
I think it is evolving to the point where podcasts are going to be more of a go-to source of knowledge and entertainment, but it's going to be something that people, I see where that has really changed, where the tipping points for me are where podcasts have been part of the pop culture a lot lately. So you're seeing TV series where the main character has podcasts. You're seeing it's just been rampant in the last few years. And I think that it indicates something, that there's a common knowledge, that's something you look to, when you're seeking knowledge or when you are into a certain thing. So I think that's definitely, an interesting point. And then because there are more, and because there's more competition, there's increasing professionalism, and also the diversity of types of podcasts, like we talked about. So creativity and coming up with sort of different formats and all kinds of things to make them interesting and professional. And I also think there's a lot of crossover now with media. So podcasts getting made into TV shows. There's always been lots of TV show podcasts, podcasts about TV series and movies and things. And so there's going to be more and more integration of all these different forms of media.
Yeah, really. And it just becomes the way you connect or hear people or something. But I wonder if this also brings us back together, whereas social kind of has brought us apart, where we don't know each other. We know 15 seconds of each other, or how angry we are about something on Facebook, because Facebook wants to trigger us. But I wonder if listening to a podcast, you get to hear someone for hours and really get to know who they are, especially if they're being, authentic and genuine. That's who they are. And so that is a way, especially interviewing people, is a way to also bring us back into connection with each other. And I know for sure this is not a short podcast, but whatever the method, kind of connects us all over again.
Yeah, it allows for deeper conversations than a lot of,
Yes.
and it is a conversation. So that is certainly a benefit of it. And I think that with what I mentioned about the future, I think too, we will really see it, different types of organizations and that kind of thing, thinking about using podcasts in different ways. So we're talking about thinking of your goals, but we are seeing larger corporations doing branded podcasts, which are often very interesting, story-oriented, of course, interviews and thought leadership, but also a lot of stories around what they do, but not in any way commercial for their product or service, but really just around the industry. And we had a very interesting one that was hosted with us that was a technology podcast, and it was really stories about technology. And it's a tech company, but nothing was like, here's our product, here's what it did for somebody. It was these big stories, big thought, fascinating, so I could listen to that and it could draw me in as a random listener, not necessarily in that space, or in that world. And I think we won't get into it probably a lot today, but we also do a lot with internal podcasts for employee training and development and internal communications. And so again, I think just we'll see more evolution of how people and businesses tap into it as a medium, but to do all kinds of different things.
As a medium itself. And there's with unlimited ways of expressing it. That's a really good point, that it is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the ways you can use it and the kinds of entertainment you can create. And yes, at the internal, I'm dying to pick your brain about that, but I feel like that's probably, how we tease people to get you back on, and also to get people tuning into another episode. Yeah. Now, I would be remiss to let a prolific reader like yourself hop off of here without asking favorite books, categories, however you want to present it. I know you're reading all the time, so just making you say one would be punishment. So a couple: fiction, nonfiction, business, non-business, whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, I mostly do read fiction. So I actually don't read a lot of business books. When it comes to business and podcasting stuff, I listen to more podcasts. So definitely when it comes to podcasting, I listen to like the one that we have, Podcasting Smarter, but there are others on podcasting. Book wise, sorry, I love everything that's kind of about culture and people and cross-cultural stuff. I love Haruki Murakami, the Japanese writer, who writes very kind of interesting, odd stories. It takes me to a different kind of place. One of my favorite kind of family sagas, cross-cultural things. I love sort of historical fiction, but also things that are, again, about different cultures and different time periods in history. And Pachinko was a very popular book. It was a Korean Japanese story over a period of decades. So really interesting, character, but historical period. And yeah, that's definitely one. But I really tried to listen. I listen to podcasts, but I also try to read books related to places that I'm interested in going or that I am traveling. Before I travel somewhere, I pretty much always read some authors from there or books about the place, and also try to find podcasts. Harder to find podcasts. It's easier now that there are more, but it's still sometimes more challenging to find the podcasts and the books. So that's a big area. And then as a communications person, I guess a book that influenced me a lot, and it's a real oldie, but goodie. It's been revised a lot, is Strunk and White. I think it's called The 5 Elements of Style. Yeah, I don't, and I think it's old, but it does have pretty recent revisions, I think. But it's a thin book. I think it's one of the few books I've moved around with me in my many moves. And it's a thin little book, and it's really, really helpful in terms of honing your writing.
So Strunk and White?
And White.
The Elements of Style?
Yeah. Or Elements of Style. I don't know where I got the 5 from. I don't think there's anything about 5 in there.
There might be 5. Look at that.
That would be the blog post version, probably, 5 Elements of Style.
Do you have one of these books, like physically?
I have it, and I'll have to check how old mine is. I need to get it updated, because there are some things, because language does evolve. So there are some things in it. It's not meant to be really specific grammar points, but there are a few things they mention in there that I think probably language has evolved. And I have to always evolve myself and say, okay, we're not stuck on that point anymore about can't end your sentence with prepositions. That's modernized now. So I have to, but most of it is really more general advice. And one of the big things I learned from it was making writing more concise.
Yeah. More concise. The whole, if I had more time, I would have written less.
Yes.
Quote
Yes.
from what's his face? Who wrote that?
I don't know who said that.
Mark Twain. Mark
Oh,
Twain.
okay.
If I had more time, I would have written less. Interesting. So with this style book, anything come to mind? Any sort of takeaways that you want to share with us from that?
Definitely the piece about making it, I guess, concise and precise would be. And the interesting thing is that has come in so much so handy. Even though when I was reading that book, it was about writing on paper, maybe a typewriter, but now it's really, really, it parlays over so much into writing for the web, writing for, that's what I ended up doing a lot of my career. And, it's different because a lot of that is also about how it's scannable, so using titles and bullet points and stuff. But the essential nature of that was also, to make it easy for people to read and to get to the point. And I remember I had a university English class the freshman year, and the school I went to, they were tough. They're tough graders. They're still known as that. They're still known for not minding giving, smart students, a D, a C, that C is considered average. And in that English class, most of the class ended up with C's. And what the professor liked was myself and one other lady who was actually a second language English learner. We both did not constantly try to just put fluffy big words in our essays. And a lot of the other students who were smart and like top of their class in school, they thought that you use a big word, you'll look impressive to the professor. And she was like, what do you really want to say? You're just throwing big words, trying to look impressive, but you haven't really communicated what you need to. And I thank Strunk and White for getting that A in that tough class, because the things that were contained in there really helped.
It's amazing how I remember, in school, sometimes there was a length requirement of your writing, make it 6 pages. And so the joke was always, double spaced, size 13 font. You could even change the kerning, to be just a little bit wider. But isn't it almost nowadays really, or once you graduate, it's how short can you make that? How quickly can you get your point across with as few pages as possible? Maybe that should be the requirement. Hey, make your essay as long as you want or short as you want, but get the point across.
Yeah, really. It's true because, a book editor wants to edit it down. If you're writing for the web, you want to come up with good content that's significant. You don't want to write necessarily a tiny thing. Google likes more content, but relevant content, not just junk. And it's a real challenge. So the book, I want to go back and review because it does have a lot of things about word choice, I would say. That are quite interesting, and not using, and I find it's easy to slip into these uses of words when something else is when you really mean something else. So it's a book that I want to get the updated version, because I know some of the things have probably been modified since my version, but it's still, if I look at it now, I still feel like it's really relevant.
Right. It does evolve, and all sorts of things are crazy that way. Quick, word nerd joke for you. What is the only word that's spelled incorrectly in the dictionary?
I don't know.
Incorrectly.
I had a feeling, but I had to.
So terrible. Yes. The dad jokes will continue until listenership increases.
Or not.
So this has been great. Hey, where can people connect with you? Social platforms, they want to connect with you. Also websites for Podbean, any specials or content. Throw it all out at us.
Great. We're podbean.com. So that's really easy to find us. And we're on most of the socials. We're actually Podbean.com. So at Podbean.com on Twitter, and that Podbean on LinkedIn. We also have a LinkedIn group specifically about business podcasting, which I think
Nice.
easiest is probably just to find the Podbean page, and then it'll be linked there. And our podcast is Podcasting Smarter. And on LinkedIn, I am Shannon Martin Writes, to make it easy to find me. Shannon Martin Writes. So I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I've gotten really a lot more into using LinkedIn and doing some networking through there. And it's especially with the corporate podcast work we're doing a lot of our education through there. So I love connecting with people. So reach out anytime.
All right. No, this is great. We'll take all of that. We'll put it in the show notes. People can just click right on through, right to that. But man, Shannon, thank you so much for coming on here and just having fun and talking podcasts for a little bit.
I love it. I love talking podcasts with podcasters.
I know. On a podcast, hosted on Podbean. Hey, like we just did all the things all at the same time.
Mix it all together.
So fun. Well, look, this has been fantastic, and I've learned a bunch. And for those listening, if you've learned something, and I freaking know you did, because I literally have 2 pages of notes front and back over here, then share this with someone. And that's how you show thought leadership. Just even one person, you learned something new, or you heard the myth. I mean, for me, that stands out: the 2 million podcasts, 600 million blogs. That tells you exactly where we're at right now. So spread that information, get that information around to fellow marketers, business owners, all the jazz, all the people that need to hear this episode and need to hear Shannon, and need to get their podcast hosted on Podbean. Well, then this is the episode to share. And that being said, Shannon, thank you again. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful talking to you.
Oh man, likewise. And for all you out there listening, this has been another cool episode of the Hardcore Marketing Show. We will catch you all next time.